Allow me to introduce Jack Landgrebe, who is one of my favorite master gardeners from the class of 2003. Jack is a former chemistry prof, and now he's a garden prof, and quite a helpful one as well. He's a master of many topics, and one of his topics is on the emerald ash borer. I had the pleasure, Jack mentored me in 2009 for my shade garden on the garden tour, which was really wonderful because we're both shade gardeners with our massive trees. So we're both tree huggers and tree lovers, and I'll let Jack take it away to inform you about your ash trees, whether they're in danger, and what the emerald ash borer is all about. So,
okay. Jack. Well, the title is, Are My Ash Trees in Danger? And unless you're living on the moon, they are. I can tell you that. Everywhere. Yeah, this is a problem that is pervasive throughout the US, except way down next to the Gulf Coast, where there are ash trees, but they don't seem to have a problem with the emerald ash borer. But everywhere else, it's a problem. And it's been spreading out, and it is there are some isolated places that don't have emerald ash borer problems yet, but they will as time goes on. But nevertheless, in spite of all that, it's pervasive, no question about it. In Lawrence, we've definitely lost literally tens of thousands of ash trees in just a relatively few years. So we want to take a look first at the ID of the ash tree to make sure you understand what ash trees we normally will see lining the streets, because they're a great street tree, and you can see the mortality of infested trees is literally 100%. So you can take these beautiful tree-lined streets, and after just a few years, you've got what is shown on the right. Not a very beautiful tree-lined street, and where the trees actually can become dangerous and have to be taken out and replaced with something else. Then we'll talk a little bit about something else later. Two types of ash trees you run into frequently on all streets where they're planted. The green ash, the Pennsylvanica species of ash, which in the fall of the year actually turns a beautiful yellow color. So it's got some nice fall color. It's a beautiful shade tree. The leaves are fairly large, as you'll see, and so it creates a lot of shade. And then finally, the white ash, which in the fall of the year actually turns a purple, reddish purple color, and also a beautiful tree, the same as the green ash. You'll find them both, and they're both in Lawrence for sure, both in Douglas County. These trees are widespread throughout the US for use in cities along streets especially. They're street trees. They took the place of the old elm trees when elms were dying off because of the Dutch elm disease, and then they were replaced with ash trees. So some of these ashes actually have been around for a while, and they're fairly large. Now, to take a look at the ID on the ash tree, let's take a look at their compound leaves. There are only 2 compound leaves shown in that picture. And each compound leaf is attached to the stem opposite, which is unusual for trees with compound leaves. Many of them are alternate, whereas these are opposite. And the fact that the leaflets are opposite is not the important point. The important point is the entire compound leaf is opposite the other entire compound leaf. And there are like 5 to 9 leaflets, not very many. One of them being right at the end. And that's fairly low when you look at walnut trees, for example. They're typically greater than 10 individual leaflets on every compound leaf. Whoops. Sorry about that. Let's take a look at the seeds. The seeds of the tree are in clusters that hang down, but it's important that you notice that there are some ash trees where there are no obvious seeds. In other words, these are trees with the ash flower gall problem, and they won't produce seeds. They're totally devoid of any seeds that are viable. It's caused by a mite, and these clusters, dark colored clusters that are in there, are in fact not hurting the tree. So even though they may look a little strange in the winter when you can see them, in the summer when you have foliage, they're hidden, so you don't even see them. In the winter, after those leaves have dropped, you do see them, but they don't hurt the tree. They don't decrease its lifespan. They don't hurt it in any way, and so it's not worth treating them. Treating them would be waste of money, really a waste of money. And they're not going to have any effect on the real damage to the tree, which is from the borer. The bark of the tree is very beautiful. It has, after you get a few years old, the tree starts to develop this deeply furrowed bark that has diamond-shaped furrows in it. That actually has it creates a problem. It makes it a little bit harder to identify when the tree is really infected with the emerald ash borer problem, as we'll see in a minute. Now here's our friend, the emerald ash borer. Not very big, smaller than a penny. It's got beautiful iridescent wing covers. And it's hard to see because when that beetle is right against the green of the large leaflets on the ash tree, they become almost invisible. And normally speaking, you don't even see them flying around. So let's take a look at the life cycle of that interesting beetle. Starting at the lower left, the adults emerge through the bark in mid-May to June. So they're pupating from the larva under the bark. And then May to June, they come out. And once they come out, their sole function is to eat, breed, and die. So the adults emerge, and the adult beetles eat the ash leaves, but they don't hurt the tree by eating the leaves. You won't even notice, if you have an infestation, you won't notice that leaves are really damaged. There'll be tiny places on a variety of leaves where there are little tiny cutout portions, and that's it. Little black spots, basically. So you don't notice that at all, and it doesn't really harm the tree. What harms the tree, as we'll see, are the larvae. And so this beetle, once it mates, lays its eggs on the bark around midsummer. The larvae, once they're born, bore down beneath the bark until they reach the cambium layer, the xylem and the phloem. The larvae develop then through the summer and the fall until the winter gets sufficiently cold and they go dormant, but they overwinter. And then they pupate again in the spring and emerge in mid-May to June. So that's the life cycle. And all of the problem comes with those larvae. And here's what the larvae look like when you strip away the bark so you can see what damage they've done. Notice over here on the left, you have these serpentine channels or S-shaped channels, and they're kind of random looking and they go all the way around the tree. So they totally disrupt the flow of water and nutrients up and down in that tree. And that kills the upper part of the tree. So the only part that's alive at that point is whatever is below that area of that particular branch. Here's what the larvae look like. They're about, if that's a centimeter, this would be roughly an inch long, maybe a little bit longer. And they form this channel that they just barely fit into. And that's what does all the damage. So that's how the tree is killed. Now, here are the things to look for to see whether or not your tree is actually infested. Dieback at the top. Not every branch will die back, just some of those branches. Whoops, sorry about that. Dieback at the top. Not the whole top, just some. And then every year, over a period of several years, it'll get worse and worse. Observation of the beetle, which, as I say, is not easy. You won't always see this beetle. When the beetle is up against a leaf, it really becomes almost invisible. So a lot of times, people who are doing research on trees that might be infected, they actually find the beetles by setting traps with pheromones, which attract the beetle, and then they can tell by looking at the traps whether or not they've actually got an infestation. But observing it yourself on your own tree, not easy. Suckers develop in the lower part of the tree, like over here. Notice lots of green suckers, and these are all below the part of the tree that is dying or dead. The tree's trying to make up for what it's not getting from what would be foliage at the upper part of the tree. And finally, D-shaped holes, where the beetles emerge around May to June. They're not very big. They're only about 1/8 of an inch in diameter. You can see from the relative size of that thumb. And these are not easy to find. At the church where I've been treating one relatively modest-sized tree for a while, I suspected from looking at the dieback that it was infected and that it might be worth, it still looked pretty good, and I thought, yeah, this would be worth treating. But I'd like to get further verification that it really was infected. So I went around the tree looking for these D-shaped holes, and I couldn't find them. No matter what I did, I couldn't seem to find them. Used a magnifier, etc. Finally found that with a knife, if I strip away bark in a variety of places, I still didn't find them right away, but suddenly, as I stripped away some bark, I found a D-shaped hole. And that's characteristic. There are other boring larvae that might infect ash trees and lots of other trees. They all make round holes. So if you got a round hole there, that does not tell you that you have an emerald ash borer. Only if you have a D-shaped hole can you verify that. And once you see one of those, that's all you need to see. There are going to be lots more. They're just not easy to find. And you know that that tree is definitely infected. And there's one other thing you could look for, and it may not really indicate necessarily the emerald ash borer as opposed to some other borer, but nevertheless, it turns out that birds, in particular, sapsuckers, love these beetles. And so if you have woodpeckers that frequent a tree, and it's an ash tree, you might suspect that it could very well be infected. But as I say, there are other borers that will infect ash trees, and the woodpeckers love those too. So they don't have a preference for that particular larva, but nevertheless, it's at least something to keep in mind, maybe to look a little closer. Emerald ash borer was detected in Eudora on September 30th, 2015. Not that long ago, really. And it could have been in the county a little longer than that, but perhaps undetected. Infection quickly spread to all surrounding counties and then westward. So right now, for example, every county, in fact, every state that surrounds us is heavily infected with emerald ash borer. And in Kansas itself, those infections, as of about a year ago, go all the way through to Riley County and probably go beyond that now. So I would guess that if they haven't already done it, they're probably getting close to places like Salina. And Salina has a lot of ash trees. They have ash trees lining every street in that town. And so that's going to be a great feast for a lot of emerald ash borers. So how do they spread around? Well, with human help. When you cart firewood from place to place, you're probably going to be taking emerald ash borer from place to place. Also, the insect itself, down below here, has about a half-mile flight range. So the emerald ash borer can fly as much as a half mile looking for another ash tree. And it may not fly that far. Maybe it'll go to an ash tree that's right next to the one that it just infected. But on the other hand, it might very well travel much greater distance than that and gradually spread out the range. And typically, and it goes in all directions. But the range started in Detroit. That's where it first came into the country. And then from Detroit, it spread in all directions, east, west, south, and north. It goes into southern Canada too. Now measuring the tree. Don't know if we can get this out of here, Jeannie. I can't seem to get that out of the title there, but anyhow, measuring the circumference of the tree is important, and the diameter of the tree. Find the circumference, first of all, of your tree. If you're getting ready to figure out whether you want to treat it or not, you can use a flexible tape or just a string. I just put a push pin in the tree at about breast height. Breast height is defined as 4.5 feet off the ground, approximate, but it's only approximate, and you don't have to be real exact about that. And take the string and just wrap it around the tree to where your push pin was, and then at that point, pull out the push pin and take that circumference string and measure its length in inches. Then take and divide that figure by roughly 3. If you're a purist, it's pi. But frankly, the difference between 3 and pi is not going to make any difference for what we need this for. That's called the diameter at breast height, or DBH. And you'll see lots of references to that DBH figure when people are talking about emerald ash borers. Now, recommendations for small ash trees. If the tree is less than 10 inches in DBH, diameter at breast height, you want to evaluate its vigor, its health, and its value. Trees that aren't, in your opinion, extremely valuable to treat probably should be removed and replaced. Remember, the longer you leave the tree, the bigger it's going to get, the more it's going to cost for continual treatments, and the more it's going to cost when you ultimately have to take it out, which you probably will. And then you can check, and I'll give you a reference to this list later, how to get it. You check a list called Preferred Trees for Northeast Kansas. This is a publication that comes out of the Department of Agriculture. Now, what about larger trees? If you have a healthy, valuable tree with a diameter of breast height of 10 inches to 15 inches, the homeowner can treat with an over-the-counter drench once a year in March through June. So if you use this method, it has to be done every year. Once a year, sometime in March through June, and then the next year at about the same time that you did it the previous year. If the diameter of breast height is greater than 15 inches, then that method really doesn't work well. So there you've got to consult a professional tree service, and the treatment by them will involve injections into the trunk. It is a lot more expensive, but the good part is that it lasts 2 years, so you don't have to do it every year. Here's a arborist applying that technique to a fairly large ash tree with a split trunk up there. And you can see that this is a bicycle pump down here. So the arborist will pump up this little container which contains the insecticide. And then they're wired, they're like very thin needles that are put into the bark about every 6 or 8 inches all the way around the tree. And those are put in deep enough that they go right into the cambium layer area. And then the insecticide gets pumped in. So it's really, really localized. And then it'll travel up the tree through the xylem and end up killing those larvae. And it's very effective. No question that this really does work. It's not perfect, but it does work. Now, do-it-yourself instructions. Here's what you need. A bucket. That's all you need. You need a bucket. And you can do it yourself, but you have to do it safely. So first, you find the circumference of the tree at breast height in inches. Okay? And you had to get that figure previously in order to get the diameter in inches. You had to do the circumference first. So you've got that, probably got that figure around, or you could easily remeasure it. Get a clean half-gallon milk carton. Okay? One that you can see through. Fill it with the number of fluid ounces of water that corresponds to the circumference of the tree at breast height in inches. And I almost guarantee you this will work no matter which one of the drenches you buy. Mark the level on the outside of that half-gallon container with a Sharpie, and then pour out the water. Now, everything up to this point can be done in your kitchen using your ounce measurements in a measuring cup, whatever kind of measuring cup you happen to have. And everything is clean and everything is free of insecticide. This is a brand new, clean half-gallon milk carton. Now, the next part comes after. So here, we fill to the mark with insecticide, and you have to do this outdoors. Then pour the insecticide into a bucket containing 1 to 2 gallons of water. Now, the instructions often say about a gallon. I would heavily recommend 2 gallons. And it turns out I've done this on my son's tree for a number of years now. It works great. It's really kept his ash tree alive when dozens of ash trees that surround him in his neighborhood are dying. So there's no question this is working, and it's doing some good. He's almost up to that 15 inches, unfortunately. But nevertheless, I'd say 2 gallons of water, and then mix it up a little bit with a paint stirrer or something like that, or a stick, and then carefully dribble it around the trunk, only about 1.5 to 2 feet out from the trunk. So pretty close to that trunk. You walk around the trunk and carefully dribble, and you don't want to pour it too fast because you want to be sure that you get that liquid drench all the way around, where when it soaks into the ground, it's going to hit all the roots that are surrounding the tree all the way around. Now, what do you do next? Well, when you do all this, wear good quality neoprene gloves. The kind of gloves that people sometimes wear for washing dishes works great. I've used those, and they work fine. And the little bit of the insecticide on there does not seem to permeate. Be sure to keep it off your clothes and shoes. That's important. So you want to be very careful when you do this. Don't apply it if the weather forecast says you're going to have a lot of rain in the next 24 hours. And don't water your lawn for the next 24 hours. I do recommend something slightly different than what you'll find on the bottles. I recommend that after you put on that drizzle around the tree, that you take your watering hose with a finer spray and you just kind of wet down the area immediately around where you've just put the drizzle in order to help force it more into the ground and kind of wash off the insecticide that's on the immediate surface area. And I've been doing that, and it obviously has not done any harm. Now, the equipment has to be rinsed off, and my suggestion is take that equipment out further from the center of the tree, maybe 10 feet or so. So you're still under the canopy of the tree. Rinse it with a hose. So you rinse that bucket a couple of times, pour it into the ground at that point. It'll still get taken up by the tree. And don't, in general, My suggestion is don't use broad spectrum insecticides ever, anywhere, except when you're trying to save a tree or a shrub that would benefit from this insecticide, like ones that are infected with the emerald ash borer. There's no need for broad spectrum insecticides in general in your yard, and you never ever want to spray this stuff anyplace, because it might just end up really ruining a good butterfly garden or things like that that are nearby. And if you have a professional do this drizzle for you, which will obviously cost you some money, make sure that that person does it by a drizzle and not a spray. Not put a sprayer down close to the ground and spray it into the ground around the tree. Don't use a spray, period, because all it takes is a little bit of wind, and that spray really travels. Now, here's a reference to the Preferred Trees of Northeast Kansas. That's the name of the publication, published by the Kansas Forestry Service. And what you want to do is go to the Douglas County Extension website, which is www.douglas.ksu.edu. Go to the Lawn and Garden section. Will be one of the options. And then search for this. Just put this into the search box at that point, and it'll come up. You'll be able to get this. And it's about 4 pages long, something like that. I think it's about 4 pages. And it has a lot of detail about a lot of possible trees that could be used to replace the one that you've taken out, with lots of information on everything you would ever want to know about those trees. Now, I wanted to show you this just quickly at the end of the talk here. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the KU Field Station, which is 4 miles north of the Lawrence Airport. So if you go along the road by the airport, you'll see there's a sign that points northward to the KU Field Station. It's on the east side of the airport. And take that road all the way, well, virtually to the end of the road. And at the end of the road, there's kind of an area that has exhibits, and there's a concrete pathway. That concrete pathway will lead you to a grove of ash trees that have been badly, badly, badly infested with emerald ash borer. And here are some pictures that I took when I went on that path. First, and I haven't been there for a couple of years. So my guess is that things have really progressed, probably a lot more dead trees than there were then. But here's a tree, for example. The whole tree is not dead, but the whole upper part of that tree is totally dead. Every tree practically that I looked at had these epicormic shoots, that is, suckers coming out low down on the tree in all over the place. And then you'll find some trees where people have already stripped off bark so you could see the D-shaped holes. And here's one of them here. That's what the D-shaped hole really looks like. About 1/8 of an inch in diameter, so it's not very big. And also, there are some trees where the bark has been stripped off so you can see those S-shaped corridors where the larvae do their damage. And you can see here, it's all over. I mean, that goes all the way around the tree, and that's what really kills it. No question about it. Now, here's my prize photo. I walked up to one tree And this was a minor miracle, I'm quite sure. I walked up to one tree and I found not only was there a D-shaped hole, but there was an emerald ash borer emerging from that hole at the moment that I walked up to the tree, which I thought was, you know, if I had come back to that tree maybe a half hour later, that ash borer probably would have been gone by that time. So I just caught him when his head had come out of the hole. And I didn't have to do anything except go up close and take a picture. I mean, it took no work at all. Now, let's talk for a second about a couple of things before we leave this, and that is biological. There are biological controls that have been used on the emerald ash borer, and one of them is to use a parasitic wasp, and that use has been approved in quite a few states where those wasps have been released. They're not from the United States. They come from other countries. And so the U.S. Department of Agriculture really looked at this very carefully to make sure that these would not cause problems. And they were convinced that they would not. They're a very specific host for this wasp. This is a stingless wasp, so it does not hurt people. In fact, it won't even pay attention to people or animals. This is a wasp that zeroes in on the ash tree, and then it puts an ovipositor down through that bark until it lands about in the area where the larvae are, and it lays its eggs, hundreds of eggs, on the larvae. And when the eggs hatch, they consume and kill the larvae. And they did some careful studies in places where these had been released and found that they do, in fact, help. No question about it. The emerald ash problem was reduced in those areas. It wasn't eliminated, but it was reduced. Kansas released them. Missouri released them. Not sure about some of the other states around us. But they have been released by a fair number of states, 10 or 15. And they do seem to do some good, but they're not really the final answer. So what is the final answer? Well, I think the wave of the future is probably some kind of hybrid ash trees. And the reason we think that is a possibility here, and people are really working hard on it, is that if you go to the Asian countries that have had lots of ash trees, emerald ash borers for many, many years, and they've had big losses of their ash trees in all of those Asian countries. Nevertheless, there are ash trees that appear to survive and currently are not drastically affected by the emerald ash borer, even though they have emerald ash borer. So the emerald ash borer and the ash tree have learned to live together. And so they're taking this as some kind of genetic change, looking at it very carefully, and then trying to find ways that we can take advantage of that. And I think that's a real possibility. So my guess is that just like the American elm was hybridized, there are hybrid American elms now that can handle the elm bark beetle. And so maybe we'll end up replacing our ash trees with elms. That would be interesting. Okay, that's all for today. Why don't you go out and enjoy your garden?
I love your yard, Jack, and I love your presentation. And very, very informative. You know, you were the person who actually alerted me to that whole circumference trick, because I have a very much loved ash tree in my front yard on the south side of my house. So I don't want to lose it because it shades the
Yeah,
house.
yeah.
I have a professional arborist that does my prunes my trees every so often, and he recommended for my ash to do the injection method. And it was after I'd done that, I think a year or two, and I spoke with you. You told me that, you know, what's the circumference, the dBH of the tree, and maybe I need to do injection. And so I want to thank you for alerting me to that trick, because I did find out, yes, my tree was mature enough that it needed to be injected. So I
Oh,
had that done, I think 2 years ago.
yeah,
Um,
that's
and
good.
yeah, I do have some other questions I wanted to ask as you were speaking too, because it was, you
Sure.
raised, you know, I mean, you covered everything really thoroughly and so clearly. You talked about when you were looking for emerald ash borers in your ash trees, you stripped away some bark and then you finally saw the D shape. Did you lose that tree?
Did I what?
Did you lose that tree? Did you have to
No.
cut it
As a
down?
matter of no, as a matter of fact, I treated that particular tree. Uh, I only treated that tree for maybe 3 years, and those 3 years were up about a year ago. And last year I did not treat it, and the tree actually still looks pretty good.
Okay.
So I don't know whether it's escape. There is something to be said for the idea, and I think this is true, but I'm not sure whether there are any real good studies on it. Namely, once you have lost a bunch of ash trees in your city or in a particular area of the city, I think the emerald ash beetles tend to travel off to areas that have better groups of ash trees. They find better things to do than to stay around looking for that one ash tree they haven't gotten yet. And so I I think maybe there is something to the fact that if your ash tree has survived, a lot of the other ash trees around you have died, then maybe that ash tree is going to hang around longer and not be drastically affected. But I don't know if that's really true or if that's just wishful thinking. I don't know.
Right, I know. Well, I happen to be from Michigan. I don't know if you can tell from
Oh yeah,
my
Michigan.
accent. Yes, and so right at the home of the beginning of the whole emerald ash borer, and I remember visiting friends in the center of the state. We visited a park, and all of the ash trees obviously were
Okay.
dying and so forth. But what the Parks and Rec department decided to do is they hired a whole bunch of artists to sculpt the trunks.
Oh,
And so it's this whole wonderful wood sculpture park, and which I thought was great. So I actually had two ash trees in the front of my yard, and my one ash, just for no reason whatsoever, not even a windstorm, one of its three major branches just fell down on the ground. And so that was a clue that something was wrong. And I was worried about emerald ash, you know, if it had something to do with it. And come to find out, it had been rotted from the very center all the way down through the center of the trunk, because
oh,
you know how the ash has that, what do you call it, like that pocket where the
yeah,
like three or four branches meet. And
right.
what had happened is that rainwater, squirrels' nests, their urine, you name it, had infected that, you know, crotch, if you will, and had soaked all the way through and rotted. Because I was debating about turning that tree into a tree sculpture, you know, hiring a KU art student to you know, leave a sculpture. So that's why when my second tree, you know, I didn't want to lose that on top of the other one. And so, you know, again, I have been using, again, both the drench method and now the injection. I also wanted to ask you about, so you gave great directions on how to use the soaking method, right, with the insecticide. and how much liquid and how much insecticide and so forth. I was curious to know if it would be helpful to kind of spray the ground before you soak the tree, to just, so especially if it's March and you've gone through a dry winter and the ground is really hard. I was just wondering if that would work, because you mentioned it's good to kind of lightly spray after
Yeah, yeah.
branch, but I was wondering about before, to help it.
One of the reasons I did it afterward, it turns out that my son has a dog who sometimes gets out around that tree, although not frequently. But nevertheless, I was worried that the dog would get out there and maybe lick the ground where I had put that insecticide, and I didn't want that. And so I thought, well, maybe one way to do it is just to give it a little bit of a spray with a hose nozzle and let that soak in and kind of clean the surface of the lawn that's under that tree. And that would then protect him, the dog, or her actually, would protect her from getting any of that insecticide. But she never went out there anyhow, so it was not really a problem. And I think we had a rain maybe 2 days after I did it the last time, and so it all got washed in at that point.
Yeah. All right. Another question I had, we are, as you say, dealing with an insecticide. We're dealing with poison. And I was curious to know if the chemicals, as a Dr. Chemistry Prof, if the chemicals in that insecticide would also kill nearby plants. For example, if you planted spring bulbs around the tree.
No, they're very specific for insects, and they're not in any way like a herbicide. So you don't have to worry about that.
Okay, because I remember asking the man who injected my tree using the injection method, if it obviously it goes up the trunk, but I was assuming it also goes through the roots. And I was curious to know, does the chemical then travel through the roots and go, and reach your garden bed where you have more plants?
No, wouldn't be a problem.
Okay.
Even if it got taken up by some other plant, it would not hurt the plant unless there were insects on the plant. It might kill those. But beyond that, no, it's not going to do what herbicides do.
Okay.
They're really very different.
All righty, good. So as you say, I'm really glad you pointed out that wonderful brochure that Kansas Forestry puts out about preferred trees in Northeast Kansas, because that's obviously one of the things that I was considering too. I was trying to debate how badly do I want to save my ash tree, or should I, because people kept telling me, and professionals were telling me, oh, just chop it down and plant a new tree now, so you'll have a shade tree over your driveway, right, for your car and for the house. And so I was searching around trying to decide, well, which tree, and I know that diversity is really important. So I wanted to avoid trees that were already growing in my immediate neighborhood, so they weren't the same tree in case we end up with an emerald ash maple borer, or something. So I was wondering if you've heard of umbrella catalpas.
No.
Well, I got turned on to umbrella catalpas when I was doing a history project on the Douglas County Horticultural Society that was founded in 1863. And you probably know about the Mount Hope Nursery that was in the north part of South Lawrence along, I want to say Main Street. It was a huge, like two or three city blocks. It was massive. Anyway, it was run by the Griesa brothers, Griesa, Adolf and Augustus. And on the north side of the nursery, Augustus is the one who had an experimental station as well. Okay, and he would, again, try all sorts of hybridizing different kinds of fruit trees. In fact, he hybridized a Douglas County pear. And I don't know, some Kansas strawberries and who knows. Anyway, but one of the trees he worked on was an umbrella catalpa. And I have this wonderful photograph of his area where he has his whole pathway lined with these umbrella catalpas. And they're literally, it's an umbrella, all right, where it's this, like the inverted D, okay? And they're not as tall as, of course, as the northern catalpas, which are massive, but they're about, I think they get about 25 feet high.
Wow.
And I was just wondering if that might be a good alternative for folks who need to, need to destroy, and remove their ash tree if it's been so terribly infected, and try an umbrella catalpa, if that would work in
Interesting.
in Northeast Kansas or not.
That might work. The of course, the ash trees can get pretty big.
Yeah.
I mean, they get pretty huge, but there are a lot of trees that you could put in there. And as I say, you can now put elms back.
Right.
You pick the right elms, you can use those, and then there are a lot of others too. I mean, there are oaks. Every tree has some kind of a problem.
Right.
Almost. It's hard to find a tree that doesn't have some disease that can do harm to it. But nevertheless, you have to live with some of that.
I wanted to go back to the galls.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I was trying to figure out is which kind of an ash tree I have. And I wrote it down someplace, and of course I can't find it now. But so you mentioned that the green ash turns yellow in the fall,
Right.
and the white ash turns like maroon in the fall.
Right.
Mine does both, and it depends. It depends on. I think it starts yellow on the south side, and then that south side turns to maroon.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if I am dealing with a cultivar. I don't know that it's necessarily a hybrid.
No.
But I'm wondering if there's a mix between a green and a white ash.
Well, there could be. Yeah, there could be. Maybe there is some hybridization that's taking place. That's interesting. I don't know for sure, but it could happen.
Okay.
Those two trees are so close that
It's gorgeous. That's another reason I want
the
to
idea of
keep it.
hybridizing between them would seem
Yeah.
quite reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a beautiful tree. I just adore. I always have to go up, from on the south side and look at my gorgeous tree. But I am concerned about those galls. So you said that the galls, because my tree is covered with galls,
Okay.
and I know, as you say, it doesn't harm the tree. But I'm just wondering though if it does weaken the tree and make it more susceptible to the emerald ash borer.
Nobody seems to think so. But I mean, all I can say is what I've read. And people generally say, no, it doesn't weaken the tree and it doesn't decrease its life. So, because the gall, it's not operating on the tree itself.
Right.
It only affects the flower.
Mm-hmm.
And it renders it unable to reproduce, but beyond that, it doesn't actually sap the tree of any energy, either in the form of food or water. Doesn't take water out of the tree. I mean, it's an insect. It's a mite that causes the whole thing. And so it's not a disease in the usual sense. But that mite, all it does is eat the flowers and convert them into this crazy gall.
But is the mite there like all the time? Or is there no way of getting rid of the mite? I mean, does the mite never go away, I guess is what I'm asking. Does it keep reproducing and it hangs around the ash tree all the time?
In principle, apparently you could treat the tree with a miticide and probably get rid of the mite. But what I've been told is that that's probably not worth it. I mean, you have to have an arborist come out and spray the entire tree with huge quantities of miticide, and it would cost you a lot of money. And why do that?
Because they're going to come back, right?
They're probably going to come back, right? That's right.
Yeah, because I've always wondered how come I don't have seeds all over the ground. Instead, I have galls all over the ground.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. No, they don't seem to fall down.
Yeah, okay. All righty.
But
Well, this is, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, this has been incredibly informative. Our time is about up. I want to thank you so very, very much, Jack. You are the Douglas County expert on ash trees and emerald ash borers, and I so greatly appreciate putting together this information in such a clear and concise way. I think it's going to help a lot of people who are wondering about even whether they should plant an ash tree at all if they haven't heard about the emerald ash borer. So I hope people will take advantage of this recording, which will be posted at the Douglas County Extension website, I think in about a week or so, I'm not sure. And I want to thank you again, Jack, and thank everyone for enjoying and learning from this wonderful presentation.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Okie doke. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Okay.